Hi, I'm Dr. Faranak Kamangar, and welcome to the Future of Dermatology podcast. We're here to talk about the real science behind skin, the medical breakthroughs, the cosmetic innovations, and everything in between. We are back with dermatologist extraordinaire, Dr. James Kilgour, and he needs no introduction to this group. He was a prior SF Derm board member, and he is a Stanford-trained board-certified dermatologist. But most recently, you're probably seeing him everywhere with Kilgour MD, his incredible scalp hair line. Dr. Kilgour was on the podcast, I believe it was episode 70, where he talked about the amazing experience of actually beginning the entrepreneurship and all of that. But today, I really wanted to have him back to talk about what are in these bottles. And so what prompted this was he was kind enough to actually send me some, I believe maybe last summer. And of course, as derms, sometimes we get different things and try it. This, of course, meant so much more because James is one of us as a derm. But I remember it was a month or two of trying the product, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have like all these new hairs. I didn't even realize I was balding, but of course I'm probably literally that demographic in the 40s that should be using this. And I texted James and was, what is in this? We need to talk about this in great detail. So James, thanks for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had so much fun the last time I was on the podcast and had so many people reach out after watching the episode. So I'm super excited to dive back in with you.
Absolutely. And it's been so incredible to see the journey of where Kilgour MD has gone. I actually had just a few patients even in clinic ask me, they said, do you know about this line? And I was like, I do. I'm using it too. So it's everywhere. And it speaks to when you create a science-backed, science-driven product made by an MD, it just speaks so much to its effect. So I'd love to talk about that. And I have to do as a side note. So my halo light that I use broke, and I was just putting one together, and I totally had a flashback of 2020 when we were doing our virtual conferences with SF Derm. And I think you had put my old one together for
Yeah,
me. And I was like, this
yeah,
is
I
so
remember it
fitting.
well.
So while in the last 6 years, I've been trying to figure out how to put together halo lights, you've done something else, figure out exactly what ingredients we need for our scalp. So yeah, tell us kind of about the science of what's going on behind Kilgour MD.
Yeah, I mean, really, the philosophy that drove the development of the products was really thinking about the way that we look after our facial skin already. I am totally a skincare enthusiast, have been for many, many years, and was really one of the big reasons that I wanted to be a dermatologist in the first place. And I have an 8-step morning and night skincare regimen. I'm proud to admit it. I have a clinical grade red light machine in my bedroom. And during my residency training, I realized one day when I was thinking about it, I only was using one shampoo and no conditioner and nothing for my head, nothing for my scalp. And it just seemed strange to me that I was investing so much time and energy into my facial skin health, but really not thinking about the scalp in the same through the same lens. Um, and at the same time, we're seeing a lot of new research really about the importance of the health and the function of the scalp for the growth of hair follicles. And it was really this light bulb moment in my mind to think, well, why not reinterpret the anti-aging skincare concept for the scalp? And so that really was the foundational belief in the products. Um, Really, the core of our regimen is a two-step system, the prevention serum and the treatment serum. The prevention serum is really, I think of it kind of like your anti-aging serum for the scalp, but not for the face, but for the scalp. And, um, you know, great products like the SkinCeuticals CE ferulic acid, some of the great Paula's Choice products, some of these other products that we love for our facial skin really were inspiration for the prevention. So the prevention is really two key ingredients in one. One is L-ascorbic acid, which is that really directly potent, biologically active, really great antioxidant for the skin, which really targets that oxidative stress pathway that's we know is that kind of common aging pathway in the skin and in the scalp. And then really dandruff is one of the unique challenges, I think, of the scalp environment, which is really pro-aging. Because if you have this kind of chronic, low-grade inflammatory process going on in the scalp, that naturally ages and damages the scalp and the hair follicles over time. And so alongside the L-ascorbic acid, targeting more of that environmental aging stress, I really wanted to target dandruff and that inflammatory stress. And so we included an ingredient called pyroxenolamine, which is a widely used anti-dandruff agent, more so in the EU and in Europe. It's on the monographs in Europe as an over-the-counter anti-dandruff agent. And it's a much safer alternative to things like zinc pyrithione, which are more commonly used here in the States. And so really the prevention serum unites these two forces together for the first time in one product. And then really to kind of upgrade and next level the L-ascorbic acid, I liposomally encapsulated it so that you really have better penetration. And in vitro studies that we've done using kind of mPOR testing in the lab, we see that our prevention serum continues to absorb into the scalp for more than 6 hours after application. And significantly, the penetration is enhanced compared to other topicals that are applied to kind of similar tissue. And so that's kind of the two key forces in the prevention serum. And then alongside, we added a few other really great active ingredients that have been studied by the manufacturers. One is a root basil extract, another is a pea peptide. And then we have a couple of other peptides, one called Capixyl and another called Procopil. And these really have great in vitro and clinical data showing that they really help to kind of change the hair follicles from more of that telogen phase to more of the anagen phase and really decrease that kind of resting phase. So you get kind of decreased shedding. And then on the other side, our treatment serum, really, I think of the treatment serum kind of like a facelift for the scalp. And so really helping to kind of redensify the hair, really a more natural but still clinically efficacious alternative to things like minoxidil. And so it contains an active called Redensil, which is a green tea bioflavonoid that has basically been shown to penetrate into that bulge region of the hair follicle and really help repair and protect those stem cells and help to kind of directly encourage them to grow hair. And then I spent a lot of time really reviewing all of the peer-reviewed research when I was trying to formulate these products. And my question was, what are the best botanical extracts for hair growth? What is the evidence that's out there? What has the most peer-reviewed evidence? And through that process, really came up with a list of my top 8. So the 8 botanicals that really have the best evidence behind them. And I consider that really my kind of super Avengers in a bottle for hair growth. And it's plant extracts from traditional Ayurvedic medicine like amla. It's extracts like ginseng, caffeine, pumpkin seeds, saw palmetto, which we know is a potent DHT androgen inhibitor, and then several others, including a pine bark extract that's a really potent antioxidant. And so this was really the basis of the system. And at the same time, some authors in Turkey, an independent group, did a randomized control trial of 3 of these actives, Redensil, Capixyl, and Procopil, and they compared them to 5% minoxidil, the maximum OTC strength. And they found in this trial, which was a 5-month study, that these actives outperformed minoxidil, both in kind of independent physician evaluation, but also in kind of patient outcomes as well. And so I knew when I saw that study that I was on to kind of the right path with the formulation of the products.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for reviewing it in detail because a lot of times it's hard to understand what's actually in products and what's actually doing the work. So many questions. Maybe I'll start from the beginning. The preventative serum. You mentioned dandruff, which I love that you touch on that because that is such a complicated thing that I see in clinic and all dermatologists do. There's this misunderstanding around what dandruff is. Some patients will identify with it, others will not. Others will say they have dry scalp or they have different versions. Some start treating that dry scalp with more oils, potentially making the dandruff worse. There was all these movements of don't wash your hair a lot, which leads to a lot more Malassezia that we have on our yeast on our scalp that we have naturally, dandruff. If you wanted to spend a couple of minutes on that, like the role of dandruff. And it's funny because I'll actually mention myself too. I think it was only a few weeks that I was using your products, and I was like, I don't think that's possible for hair to be having an effect that quickly. What is it? And I remember I texted you, and you were like, well, it could be Malassezia related, and it's not something you would even think about necessarily, unless you have there are the subset of patients that have very clear, severe dandruff, and they know they've always had it, but for the rest of people that they don't really identify with that, we don't quite understand the role of, Malassezia on our scalp and what it's doing. And you just mentioned also it's involved in aging. So would love to just kind of get into that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I have a clinical practice here in Sacramento, California. And I naturally see hair loss every day. It's my kind of main specialty outside of general dermatology. And I see really a lot of women kind of peri and post menopause with hair loss, hair thinning. And what I've been noticing just anecdotally is that maybe half of those women, when I look at their scalp, I'm seeing some level of seborrheic dermatitis. Whether that's kind of more scalp erythema to visible flakes to the patient describing some of the symptoms of itch and kind of that kind of discomfort on the scalp. And I've been finding that when we treat that seborrheic dermatitis, they're really noticing an impact on shedding. And so, just anecdotally, building on some of the more formative studies and research out there, I personally believe, from my own experience and from doing this work, that I really think that it's an important driver of hair loss, particularly in that menopausal population, but also more widely as well. And so that was why it was so key for the products to really kind of combat that dandruff process head on. Um, and as a dermatologist, I see a lot of seborrheic dermatitis, and I think many of our listeners will be able to relate to this. I think it's very challenging to treat because a lot of our current tools are kind of shampoo-based treatments. And a lot of my patients just don't shampoo enough to really get the most benefit from those treatments. Things like the RX ketoconazole shampoo that, I reach for daily, really is not the best formulated shampoo. It's very sulfate driven, it's very drying. And so often when I have patients with more textured hair, it's a huge conundrum really how to treat it if, they only shampoo once a week. Things like the fluosinonide solutions that I also use a lot of, are really gunky and really I struggle to see how people can use those daily without shampooing every day. And so what I liked about the prevention serum is that it's delivering that daily kind of dose of this proctinolamine to just kind of continuously control the Malassezia in the skin of the scalp and kind of control it in a way that is much more user friendly. And so I think dandruff is something I'm really, really interested in kind of the therapies of. And it's something that Kilgour MD, we're doing a lot of R&D and work in. And so you will be seeing something new from us sometime this year in that space. So keep posted.
Very excited to see what's coming out. And it's, we're really drilling down on this nuanced like part of hair and hair loss, but it's an interesting thing because we don't talk about it often, but it's something we all see in clinic. Like that situation you just described where you're kind of like, okay, there's some element of Malassezia, seborrheic dermatitis, dandruff going on here. We all see it, but yet we don't really see maybe like a half an hour long lecture dedicated to this at a conference. Whereas it's such a common issue. And even just as you said it, I had the realization that you're right. We're doing a lot of just wash off treatments, that it's the right target. It's the anti-yeast, but it's in a not good formulation. You're washing it off. Even if we write on there, leave it on for 10 to 15 minutes while you wash 2 to 3 times a week. Like who can do that really? And then their hair is probably super dry if they actually did that 3 times a week. And then our leave-on products are steroid based, which is getting at the inflammation. It's kind of like a Band-Aid, but it's not reducing the yeast count at all. So I know we're probably maybe beating this to death by talking about it more, but this is such an important point that we don't see elsewhere. I don't think we talk about it. And it is such an important part. And we see patients coming back. Yeah, I use the ketoconazole. My scalp is still itchy. Like how many of these patients do we see perimenopausal, menopausal with the itchy scalp? And I think it comes back to this. Your hair is also drying out at this point. So if I gave you a shampoo that was super dry, you probably didn't love it. Your hair is probably also graying. So you're coloring it. And then this shampoo's ruining your color. So I mean, the patient adherence things are really real. So it's amazing that you're spending time to actually think of real-time products that patients will adhere to.
I think what's also amazing is, the number one dandruff shampoo in the US is Head and Shoulders, and the active ingredient is zinc pyrithione, which is actually banned in the European Union, Europe-wide, because in animal studies it's a reproductive toxin. And so it's been shown from miscarriage to birth defects. And while human studies haven't shown that impact. Given that this is an OTC cosmetic, that was why the European Union made the decision to just ban it for cosmetic use. And I really would encourage the FDA to take the same decision. I think there are much more safer alternatives to zinc pyrithione, such as pyroxenolamine, which really should be added to the FDA monograph for OTC dandruff treatment. And really, we should be moving on beyond, something which is not 100% safe based on the data.
That's a really good point too, and there's so much data globally, and sometimes we tend to focus on US produced data, but around the world, people are studying things, finding things, and we really should be incorporating it. And some areas skincare is a bit more advanced, as we know. As well. And then another point I wanted to ask you about, what are your thoughts on oils? I find patients come in so often and they will literally bring in the bottles of oils. And they're like, well, so and so told me this oil of this botanical is good, or this, or someone might listen to this and even the botanical ingredients that you just said, Google it and find the oil version of that. What do you think of that scenario?
Yeah, one of the plant botanicals we use in our treatment serum is rosemary extract. And I did a social media video where I made the off the hand joke that, don't use rosemary oil, we're not making focaccia, and have been inundated with comments on this. And I want to set the record straight that there is a big difference between rosemary oil and rosemary extract. Rosemary extract is the part of rosemary that really has those beneficial active ingredients for hair growth. The problem with rosemary oil is that it's a fragrant oil, and so it has some of those more irritating potential aspects than rosemary extract, and so that is the difference. Um, I see a lot of patients using kind of various oils for their hair and for their scalp. And, it really depends on the oil they're using. I think some oils like argan oil tend to be much more non-comedogenic and cause, fewer issues for the scalp. I think some of the other oils that I see, I definitely see kind of folliculitis and more of these issues on the scalp. And to your point, I think can also lead to Malassezia becoming rampant because it obviously likes that oil-rich environment, and you're kind of adding more oil to the fire. So, I think oil is obviously a very broad definition, and there's a lot of oils that fall under that. It really depends on the oil they're using.
Yeah, it's true. There's so many different products. They think it's the main takeaway is just because you hear that name and you see that on a label doesn't mean you're going to have that same effect. And the amazing thing is you're taking it one step level. You guys are doing clinical trials. So not only do we have these names, not only do we have these formulations that we know hypothetically should penetrate through the scalp, but let's do the clinical trials and see the actual effect and if it activates where it needs to. And I love what you actually, if you want to give a comment about, we talked about this a second ago about just clinical trials, quote unquote, I would say, in sort of the cosmeceutical world. Would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, clinical trials really, I think, are such a buzzword for cosmetic brands these days. I think they always have been, but I think the current era, a lot of we went through this era of clean beauty, and now I think we're very much into this era of kind of science-backed brands. And a lot of the kind of strategic acquirers for beauty brands are really looking for brands that have clinical credibility. But not all clinical trials are made equal. What I see is oftentimes what is quoted as a clinical trial is really a consumer perception study. I gave the product to a certain number of people, and 9 out of 10 said that they liked the product. While that, is interesting, that's not a clinical trial. A clinical trial needs to have objective outcome measures. And so we just completed a clinical trial in Spain at the University of Valencia, where we took 43 menopausal women, which again was really important because so much of the research in androgenetic alopecia is in male patients. We focused on the menopausal woman. We took 43 women using our products daily for 4 months, and we did kind of regular lab-based assessments. And so these women would come in using a kind of modified hair salon style basin and a muslin cloth. They would undergo a special neutral shampooing process, and then the hair that was shed during that shampooing process would be captured and then separated by size and counted. They then underwent very specific combing protocols, again, to capture the hair that was shed. And then once kind of dried off, they had microscopic photography taken. And then two independent board certified dermatologists rated the patients against the Ludwig scale at each time point. And one did this in person live, and the other one separately did it using the macroscopic photography. And then the two were correlated. And what we found in this clinical trial is that by week 6, there was a 60% decrease in shedding through those objective measures. And by month 4, more than half the women had at least a 0.5 grade improvement on that 9-point Ludwig scale. And for context, a 0.5 improvement on Ludwig is really what you would expect from 6 to 12 months of either oral minoxidil therapy or oral finasteride or dutasteride therapy, or 3 to 4 treatments of PRP. So this was a meaningful change and meaningful improvement in really a relatively short period of time. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is, I think there's a lot of misrepresentation of clinical trials when they're really consumer perception. Objective measures really are key. And then the last thing really is, a lot of studies will show an improvement, but is it clinically meaningful? And I think as scientists and physicians, we're so used to looking at data with a critical eye, but I think a lot of the general public don't realize that these things are important. And so there was a recent brand that I was looking at that has a product for graying hair, and it showed in a randomized controlled trial a pretty impressive response rate where I think 80 or 90% of people had improvement in the gray hair using kind of this microscopic photography. But when you look at the before and after images, the change is not clinically meaningful. You can appreciate that the hair has less gray on these kind of zoomed in photos, but I think for the actual person, they probably wouldn't notice much of a difference. And so that's the other question is, was this a real clinical trial? Were the outcomes objective? And actually, were the headline findings really clinically meaningful to these people? And unless all three are true, it's really not that helpful of a study. It's really at that point more marketing.
I love it. And I hope that by kind of having this shift more towards science-backed skincare and hopefully more and more created by physicians, because I think you're trained in that mindset. You're not going to put out a study that says 99% said they were happy, 99% satisfaction. Like, what does that mean, right? So you like it's amazing that like the very rigorous study that you just described that you guys did, literally counting the hairs, even capturing it at home. And that's a very meaningful result. That's incredible. And like you mentioned, even oral minoxidil, PRP, which is a lot of work in the office. And it makes you think then next step is, of course, my brain goes to what if we combine all of these? So I'm sure some of those studies will come down too. But hopefully as the bar is being raised on the clinical trials necessary, other brands will sort of be forced to do similar things. And maybe it'll follow that consumers will start be asking for more rigorous studies as well from other brands. And then the other part is there was you tell me this part. I'm probably not going to explain it well, but there was an article. There's something going on with some peptides out of Stanford. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So one thing just to take one step back quickly to pick up on your point, I think I'm really glad to be in this position. I feel like I'm really living my best life with this brand, and really that's because being in the driving seat as a physician, I'm really able to reinvest the profits that are coming from our customers into R&D. And so I am exceptionally excited by all of the R&D work we have in our pipeline. Not just in terms of new products and new active compound development, new formulations, but also in terms of just the clinical testing and data that we're doing. And we have some really exciting work that we'll be sharing this year, next year. Really, I always wanted to be an academic dermatologist, and what I struggled with in academia is how hard it is to move the needle and tangibly make a difference to people's lives. And through the fortunate position of now having a successful brand, I'm able to really take those priorities and make those at the forefront. And so what I would love to share with the audience here is just, we need more physicians in the driving seat, not just as quote unquote advisory, or, whether it's a token, face of a brand, but really in the C-suite, in the driving seat, able to take those priorities of our patients and invest in R&D. And so I'm exceptionally grateful. One of the kind of the aspect you're alluding to, Afara, is that we have a collaboration that we signed with a really exciting lab that was spun out of Stanford, the lab of Professor Paul Wender, who's a professor of chemistry at Stanford. They had developed a really exciting platform for basically using short chain peptides to help with the delivery of topical drugs into the skin. And we partnered with them to really take that technology that they were developing for drugs and really apply it to cosmetic actives. And so really these peptides act like magnets, and they draw the active ingredients deeper into the skin. We have a few target compounds that we're working on, and already the initial results are mind-blowing. And as you know, my brain is activated by all the potential, and so we are not only developing new products, at least 2 new products with the work that is coming out of the lab. We also will be upgrading our existing products as well. So we always take an always-on approach. We're always trying to upgrade our products. Kind of like certain car companies, we always want our products to be really at the forefront of development. And even though we have a best-selling product, I don't want us to rest on our laurels. I always want it to be the best and the latest that we can do. So I'm incredibly excited. And again, this partnership with Stanford came from really having a physician in the driving seat. And so anyone who's listening, if you have an idea for a brand, for a product, I really encourage you to do it, because we need more people like us from our community really spearheading brands.
That's fantastic. And you're such a resource for our community as well. And someone that people can look up to. Like this, it can be done. You can have a very busy clinical practice and also do this and do this. It doesn't always have to be, one or the other. And I think you mentioned, are you guys going to be at the AAD? Can we promote that for people to come and engage
Yes,
with you there?
we will be at the exhibit hall this year at AAD in March in Denver. We are offering free scalp and upper body massages, free product, of course. We will have a blow dry bar with our new leave-in conditioner product. I'll be there. We have Prax coming. It's going to be a really fun event. And we would love to talk to any dermatologists, providers, anyone in the dermatology community that wants to learn more. We have opportunities coming for partnership as well. So we're always looking to collaborate with our fellow colleagues in the field. And so, yeah, super excited for it. And really would love to meet as many people as possible from our community. And then the results of our first clinical trial are in peer review as we speak. And so hopefully shortly later this year, we'll be publishing those results in a peer review journal, which again is an important part of our philosophy.
That's fantastic. And of course, at the end of the podcast, we always ask about the future of dermatology. So, you alluded to some of the products coming out, but what are you most excited for this year and the upcoming future for the brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of echo what I said earlier and your points, Farah, I'm really excited to see more consumer brands that are really physician led and really have not just, we often say with our brand, it's not just dermatologist developed, but it's dermatologist led, and that's really key. I'm the CEO of the brand. I'm a board certified dermatologist, and I'm really excited to see what our other colleagues, colleagues in the community can do as well, and really develop products that are really patient centric and really solve these key issues in a way that is really clinically credible, that's scientifically based, with publication of data. And I think hopefully we can spearhead a whole movement of brands being led by physicians and dermatologists.
That would be amazing. I would love to see that. And if there's any ways to promote that kind of network or community, just let us know too. We can always start the movement with the SF Derm crowd. And there's been lots of great innovation that's come up, obviously out of the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. So I feel like this is a great area to start it. And you're definitely going to see me at your booth. I mean, you had me at scalp massage and hair getting blown out. I might come a few different times with like different attire, pretend like I'm a different doctor. I was like, no, I wasn't here an hour ago. I'm back again.
All right,
That sounds amazing.
You are welcome to just hang out at the booth all day.
I might just hang out there for a few hours.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sounds
we're
great.
super excited. It's going to be really, really fun. And anyone that's listening, please come and say hi.
Oh, absolutely. That sounds amazing. And thank you so much for joining again, James. It's amazing to see this trajectory. Very excited to try all of the new products as they come out. You're doing incredible work. So we can just say we're peripherally seeing it, and we were there from the beginning, just watching the growth. So it's really exciting.
Thank you so much for having me again. This is such a great podcast. The response to the last one was so amazing.
Thanks for joining us today on the Future of Dermatology podcast. If you enjoyed learning about the science behind skin, make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only, not for medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider.